The air in the New Orleans courtroom was as thick and heavy as the August humidity clinging to the city outside. It was a tangible thing, tasting of old paper, stale coffee, and the collective anxiety of a dozen people waiting for a verdict. But for Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Tran, the tension was a familiar element. She thrived in it. She stood before the jury box, a picture of composed intensity. Her black blazer was sharp, her posture impeccable, and her dark hair was pulled back into a severe knot at the nape of her neck. Nothing about her was soft or yielding. Today, she was a weapon of the law, and her words were the blade. "For weeks," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the low hum of the ceiling fan, "the defense has painted a picture of Mr. Dubois as a simple businessman, a pillar of his community who was merely in the wrong place at the wrong time." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the jurors, meeting each of their eyes for a fraction of a second. But the evidence tells a different story, not of a businessman, but of a predator. The wrong place was his warehouse. The wrong time was every single day he poisoned our streets with his product. Across the room, Marcus Dubois, a mid-level smuggler with hands as dirty as the Mississippi riverbed, smirked at his lawyer. He believed he was untouchable. Evelyn had seen that smirk 100 times on men just like him. It was the arrogance of criminals who thought the system was a game they could win. Her job was to remind them that the house always wins. "Do not be swayed by charisma," she concluded, her voice dropping to a near whisper, drawing the jurors in. "Look at the facts. Look at the lives ruined. Find him guilty. Not because it is easy, but because it is just." She returned to her seat, the silence in her wake more powerful than any shout. She didn't look at Dubois. She didn't need to. She had done her job. The rest was up to them. It took the jury less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. A quiet satisfaction settled in Evelyn's chest, a cool and familiar feeling. Outside the courtroom, her boss, District Attorney Abernathy, clapped a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Another one for the win column, Evie. You dismantled their entire defense. It was a work of art." "They had no defense, Frank," she replied, packing her files into her briefcase. "Just a flimsy story. Justice was served." "Justice in your ambition," Abernathy said with a knowing, fatherly smile. "I know you're already thinking about the next one, but savor this. Dubois was a nasty piece of work." He was right. She was already thinking about the next one. Dubois was just a branch. She wanted the root. Later that evening, the victory felt distant. The lights of New Orleans glittered through the floor-to-ceiling window of her office. It was a beautiful city, a city of music, magic, and history, but Evelyn knew its other side. The side that operated in the shadows, in the back rooms of jazz clubs and the opulent silence of Garden District mansions. She kicked off her heels and walked to the far wall of her office. It was covered by a massive corkboard, a chaotic web of photos, newspaper clippings, bank statements, and surveillance reports. In the very center, like a dark sun around which everything else orbited, was a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, showing a man stepping out of a black sedan. Tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his face was mostly obscured by shadow. What was visible was a sharp jawline and an aura of cold, controlled power. Dante Moretti. To the world, he was a reclusive real estate magnate. To the city's underworld, he was Il Fantasma the Ghost, the untouchable, unseen king of the Argent Syndicate. For 2 years, he had been Evelyn's singular obsession. Men like Dubois were mere soldiers. Dante Moretti was the king. He ran the city's criminal empire with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a shark, his hands remaining spotlessly clean. No one talked. No evidence ever stuck. He was a phantom haunting her case files. Her own past fueled the obsession. She could still remember the fear in her father's eyes as he handed over a wad of cash to a neighborhood thug every Friday at their small family restaurant. It wasn't a mafia empire, just petty extortion, but the helplessness she felt then had forged the iron in her soul. She had clawed her way to this office to ensure no one would ever have that power over her or anyone else if she could help it. Dante Moretti was the ultimate expression of that power. Taking him down wouldn't just be the biggest case of her career, it would be the culmination of her entire life's purpose. It would be justice, absolute and final. Her fingers traced a red string connecting Moretti's photo to a known Argent front company. It was a dead end, just like all the others. Frustration tightened her jaw. She needed a crack, just one small fissure in his marble fortress. As if summoned by her thoughts, her desk phone rang, its sharp, shrill cutting through the quiet office. She picked it up. Tran. It was Detective Rourke, one of the few cops on the force she trusted implicitly. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You wanted a crack in the fortress? I think we might have one." Evelyn stood straighter, her heart beginning to pound a steady, powerful rhythm against her ribs. This was it. "Talk to me, Rourke." "We got a whisper from a CI," he said. "A very high-level accountant inside Argent. Name's Alistair Finch. Word is, he's scared. He thinks Moretti is cleaning house, and he might be next on the list. He's looking for a lifeline." Alistair Finch. She knew the name. He was the man who supposedly managed Argent's legitimate real estate holdings. If he handled the real books, he could be the key to everything. A slow, determined smile spread across Evelyn's face as she stared at the blurry photo of her phantom. "Find him," she ordered, her voice cold as steel. "Find me Alistair Finch. The ghost's reign over this city is about to end." While Evelyn Tran plodded in her brightly lit office, the man she hunted sat in shadow. Dante Moretti's penthouse was a stark, minimalist space of glass, chrome, and polished black marble that seemed to float above the vibrant chaos of New Orleans. From this vantage point, the city was a silent, glittering map of his territory. The pulsing lights of Bourbon Street, the stately glow of the Garden District, the dark expanse of the Mississippi, he saw it all, owned it all, but touched none of it. Dante was not a man who reveled in excess. His home was a fortress of solitude, devoid of personal trinkets, save for a single, ornate chessboard of carved ivory and onyx set before the window. He sat there now, a glass of amber whiskey untouched beside him, contemplating the board. He was playing both sides, as always. It was the only way to anticipate every possible move. With a long, steady finger, he slid his white knight into a position that trapped the Black Queen. A sacrifice, a necessary loss to ensure ultimate victory. That was how he ran his life and his organization. The silent glide of a private elevator door announced the arrival of his second-in-command, Marco. A stout man with the weathered face of a career soldier, Marco was a relic of his father's era, loyal, brutally efficient, and utterly devoted to the Moretti family. "Dante," Marco said, his voice a low gravel. He didn't approach too closely, always maintaining a respectful distance. "The shipments from the port are clear. The councilman sends his gratitude for the campaign donation." Dante didn't look up from the board. "His gratitude is irrelevant. His vote is what I paid for." He finally moved his gaze from the board to Marco's reflection in the window. "What else?" Marco hesitated, the first sign of trouble. "It's Finch, the accountant. He's been sloppy, making calls from unsecured lines. My man inside the bank says he tried to access offshore transfer protocols he shouldn't even know exist." Dante's expression remained unchanged, a mask of cold neutrality. But inside, a familiar, unwelcome feeling stirred, the annoyance of a loose thread. He despised loose threads. They could unravel the most carefully woven tapestry. Alistair Finch had been with the syndicate for a decade, a brilliant numbers man who was well paid and well protected. For him to panic now meant someone was applying pressure. "He's scared," Marco stated plainly. "Wants to run." "A running man is a talking man," Dante said, his voice soft, yet carrying an edge that could cut glass. He thought of Finch, a perpetually sweating man with weak eyes and a taste for luxuries beyond his official salary. Predictable. For a fleeting second, an image flashed in Dante's mind, not of Finch, but of another time, another betrayal. The memory came with the scent of rain and blood, the sound of screams, and the sight of his younger sister's favorite doll lying face down in a puddle. It was chaos that had killed her. Unpredictable, messy violence from a rival family. He had spent the decade since eradicating chaos from his life and his business. Every action was precise, every outcome controlled. He would not allow a coward like Finch to bring chaos to his door. "He is a symptom, not the disease," Dante said, his focus returning to the present. He stood and walked to the window, his imposing silhouette framed against the city lights. "Killing him is easy, but it's loud. It tells our enemies we have a leak. I want to know who is whispering in his ear. I want the disease." "What are your orders?" Marco asked. "Have his surveillance doubled. Every call, every email, every person he meets for coffee. I want to know what he eats for breakfast. Let him think he's being clever. A scared rat will always lead you to the snake's nest. When he runs, we will be waiting." "Understood," Marco said. He turned to leave, but paused at the elevator. "There's one more thing. The district attorney's office has been making inquiries about our port logistics contracts, specifically a young ADA. Ambitious. Name's Tran. Evelyn Tran." Dante turned slowly from the window. The name was familiar. He made it his business to know every significant player on the city's legal chessboard. He knew she was the one who had just sent Marcus Dubois away for 20 years. A minor loss, but she had done it with surgical skill. He walked over to a sleek, modern desk. With a few taps on a tablet, he pulled up a file. Evelyn Tran's official DA headshot appeared on the screen. Dark, intelligent eyes stared back at him, filled with a sharp, unyielding resolve. There was no fear in them, no compromise. Just a relentless focus he recognized because it was so much like his own. He studied her face, this self-proclaimed queen of justice. She saw him as a target, a monster to be slain for her career and her ideals. How amusing. She had no idea what kind of monster she was hunting. "Keep an eye on her as well, Marco," Dante said, his voice a low murmur. "It seems the game has a new player." He closed the file, but her face remained etched in his mind. She was a threat, yes, but as he looked back at his chessboard, a flicker of something other than annoyance passed through him. It was a cold, sharp feeling of anticipation. Finally, a worthy opponent. Dawn broke over New Orleans not with a brilliant sunrise, but with a shroud of thick, gray mist rolling off the Mississippi. It clung to the rusted iron of the Crescent City Connection Bridge and deadened the sound of the city slowly waking. It was the perfect morning for secrets. Inside a nondescript surveillance van parked a block away from Woldenberg Park, Evelyn Tran felt a familiar coil of adrenaline tighten in her stomach. On the monitors before her, she had 4 different camera feeds showing the foggy riverfront. Her target, Alistair Finch, had agreed to meet. "All teams in position?" she asked into her headset, her voice a low, steady command. "Alpha and Bravo teams are set," Detective Rourke's voice crackled back. He was on foot, dressed as a jogger, positioned 50 yards from the designated meeting spot. "He's late." "He's scared, not punctual," Evelyn countered, her eyes scanning the feeds. "He'll show. Just be ready." This was it. The culmination of 2 years of dead ends and frustratingly thin files. Finch was her silver bullet. He had promised a ledger, a complete, encrypted record of the Argent Syndicate's illegal transactions. It was the key to Dante Moretti's kingdom, and she was about to turn the lock. Her plan was perfect. A controlled takedown in a semi-public space, with enough manpower to ensure nothing went wrong. She allowed herself a brief, fleeting image of Dante Moretti in handcuffs. The thought was as satisfying as a guilty verdict. 5 stories up, in the empty shell of a waterfront warehouse undergoing redevelopment by an Argent-owned construction company, Marco watched the same scene unfold through a powerful spotting scope. He held a phone to his ear. "The lawyer has her cops in place," he reported calmly. "Looks like a standard witness protection setup. Finch is 10 minutes late." On the other end of the line, Dante's voice was serene, without a trace of concern. "Let him go to them, Marco. Let him feel safe. I want to see if he's followed. A man like Finch leaves a trail." Dante had no intention of stopping the meeting. The police were a predictable entity. He understood their rules, their limitations. They were a tool. He would let Finch hand over whatever useless, outdated information he had, and in return, the accountant's panic would flush out the real threat, the person who had terrified him into running in the first place. Dante's trap was far more subtle than Evelyn's. He wasn't hunting Finch. He was hunting the ghost that haunted him. "He's here," Marco suddenly murmured. "A little gray sedan. He looks like he's about to be sick." On Evelyn's monitor, Alistair Finch scurried out of his car. He was a small, doughy man, his expensive suit rumpled and his face pale with sweat despite the cool morning air. He clutched a briefcase to his chest like a life raft. Rourke approached him, calm and reassuring. "Mr. Finch," Rourke's voice came through Evelyn's earpiece. "Glad you could make it. Do you have what we discussed?" "It's all here," Finch stammered, his eyes darting around nervously. "The ledgers, the accounts, everything. You have to protect me. You don't understand what he'll do if he finds me." "You're safe with us," Rourke assured him, reaching for the briefcase. Evelyn leaned forward, her breath held. This was the moment. Victory. But the victory never came. It happened with a terrifying, silent efficiency. A black panel van with no license plate screeched around the corner, its tires barely making a sound on the damp pavement. Before Rourke or his backup teams could react, the side door slid open and 3 figures emerged. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces hidden by ballistic masks. They were not police. They were not Marco's men. They were something else entirely. A silenced gunshot puffed the air, and Rourke cried out, clutching a leg that suddenly buckled beneath him. Chaos erupted. The figures moved with professional, military precision. One grabbed Finch, who was frozen in terror, while another snatched the briefcase from his hand. Shots fired, all teams, move in, move in. Evelyn yelled into her mic, her heart leaping into her throat. But it was too late. Before her officers could even get a clear line of sight, the figures had thrown Finch into the van, slammed the door, and sped away, vanishing into the mist as quickly as they had appeared. The entire event took less than 15 seconds. In the warehouse, Marco swore viciously under his breath. Dante, did you see that? That wasn't us, not a rival crew. They moved like professionals. Dante was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. His perfect calculation had just been shattered by an unknown variable. Someone had bypassed his surveillance. Someone had attacked the police in broad daylight. This wasn't a move of desperation. It was a declaration of war from an unknown enemy. They didn't kill Finch. They took him. And the data. His trap had been hijacked. Evelyn shoved the door of the surveillance van open, running toward the scene. Paramedics were already attending to Rourke, whose injury was painful but not life-threatening. The briefcase was gone. Finch was gone. Her silver bullet had vanished into thin air. As she knelt by Rourke's side, a chilling realization washed over her, cold and sharp as the river water. This wasn't Dante Moretti's work. His methods were subtle, like poison, not a sledgehammer. He was Il Fantasma, a ghost who never showed his hand so openly. Her perfect trap hadn't just failed. It had been sprung by a predator far more brazen and unknown than the one she had been hunting. She was no longer the hunter. She was just another player in a game whose rules she didn't understand, and her only lead had just been kidnapped by a ghost far more real than Dante Moretti. The hospital hallway smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Evelyn stood watching through a small window in a recovery room door as Detective Rourke slept, his leg elevated and bandaged. The doctors said he'd make a full recovery, but the guilt was a physical weight in her chest. He had been hurt on her operation. Her perfect plan. Hours later, back in her office, the feeling of failure had curdled into a cold, hard knot of fury. Her war room, once a source of pride, now mocked her. The strings and photos on the corkboard felt like a child's game. She had been playing checkers while a grandmaster moved pieces she couldn't even see. The police had nothing. The van that took Finch had been stolen and was found torched an hour later, leaving no forensic evidence. It was a professional job, executed by ghosts. She was at a dead end, her career-making case incinerated before it had even begun. Powerless. The word echoed in her mind, tasting like ash. It was the one feeling she had dedicated her life to never experiencing again, and it was in that moment of absolute desperation that she knew what she had to do. The thought was insane, a violation of every principle she held, but it was the only move left on the board. She had to talk to Dante Moretti. The question was how. She didn't have to wait long for an answer. As if he could read her thoughts, a sleek black envelope appeared on her desk, delivered by an internal mail clerk who had no idea where it came from. There was no name, no return address. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single, heavy piece of cardstock. Embossed in minimalist silver lettering were an address in the French Quarter and a time, 10 p.m. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. He knew she was desperate. He knew she would come. At 9:55 p.m., Evelyn stood outside an unmarked iron door on a quiet, gaslit side street. She wore plain clothes, had her service weapon holstered discreetly at her back, and had told absolutely no one where she was going. The address belonged to a long-defunct jazz club, the Gilded Cage. A fitting name. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped into the lion's den. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the phantom scent of old whiskey and forgotten music. The club was a cavern of shadows, with only a few dim lights illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. At the far end of the room, a figure stood behind the long mahogany bar, a silhouette against the mirrored back wall. As he turned, her breath caught. It was him. Dante Moretti was taller than his photos suggested, and his presence filled the cavernous room with a quiet, gravitational pull. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, and his dark hair was perfectly styled, but it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of a stormy sky, and they watched her approach with a calm, unnerving intelligence. He wasn't just looking at her, he was analyzing her, dismantling her. "Miss Tran," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that seemed to absorb the silence. "Thank you for coming. I trust you've had a difficult day." Evelyn stopped a dozen feet from the bar, keeping a safe distance. Her anger was a shield. "Cut the pleasantries. Where is he?" Dante raised a single eyebrow, a gesture of mild amusement. "Your witness? I was hoping you could tell me. After all, He was in the custody of your police department. An operation you were clearly monitoring, she shot back. Was this your grand plan? To let my team walk into an ambush? He took a slow sip from a glass of what looked like whiskey. Let's be logical, he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. My accountant decides to betray me. I could have had him disposed of with a single phone call, quietly and permanently. Why would I arrange a theatrical and messy abduction that involves attacking police officers? It was inelegant. It lacked finesse. His words, cold and precise, struck their intended target. He was right. The morning's events were brutally loud, a stark contrast to the silent, invisible methods of Il Fantasma. So you admit it wasn't you, she said, her mind racing. It was an attack on my organization, he corrected her, his voice hardening slightly. Alistair Finch, and the data he carried, are my property. Someone has stolen from me. Someone has also sabotaged your case. It would seem we have a mutual problem. Evelyn stared at him, the horrifying implication of his words dawning on her. You think I would work with you? You're the man I've sworn to put behind bars. And you may still try, Dante said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. But for now, a more dangerous player has taken the board. You have no leads. Your department is chasing shadows. I, on the other hand, have resources that operate in those shadows. He stepped out from behind the bar, moving with a silent, predatory grace. He stopped a few feet from her, and she had to fight the instinct to take a step back. The air crackled with tension. You want justice, Miss Tran. You want to find the men who shot your detective and took your witness. I want my property back, and I want to eliminate the threat to my organization. For now, our objectives are aligned. He reached into his jacket and placed a small, folded piece of paper on a nearby dusty table. The shell company that owned the van used in the abduction was liquidated 2 days ago. The funds were transferred through 3 offshore accounts and originated from a holding company in Amsterdam, a company your police department won't find a link to for weeks. I found it in an hour. Evelyn stared at the paper, then back at his piercing gray eyes. It was a test, a peace offering wrapped in a power play. He was offering her the first step, a lead she couldn't get anywhere else. But she knew the price. Think about it, he said, turning and walking back toward the darkness he had emerged from. You can continue to chase my ghost and fail, or you can make a deal with the devil to hunt the real monsters. The choice is yours. He disappeared through a door behind the bar, leaving her alone in the silent, cavernous club. She was left with nothing but the echo of his words, an impossible choice, and the single piece of paper that could be either her salvation or her damnation. For a long time after Dante vanished, Evelyn remained frozen in the center of the silent jazz club. The air was thick with the weight of her choice. The small, folded piece of paper on the table was a tangible line drawn in the sand of her life. On one side was her career, her principles, the clear, bright line of the law. On the other was this dark, uncertain path, a path that might lead to the truth, but at the cost of her soul. Her duty to justice and her loyalty to Rourke warred with her deep-seated hatred for men like Moretti. But what was the alternative? To let Rourke's assailants disappear? To allow this new, violent power to fester in her city? To admit defeat? Never. With a steady hand that betrayed the turmoil in her heart, she walked to the table and picked up the paper. It felt heavier than it should. She had made her choice. As she stepped out of the unmarked door and back into the humid New Orleans night, a figure detached itself from the shadows of the alley. It was Marco, Dante's loyal soldier. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to the weapon at her back. Marco held up a placating hand. He wasn't there for a fight. He extended a small, sleek burner phone. He thought you might need this, Marco said, his voice a low rumble. It's secure. He will contact you. Only answer calls from unknown. She took the phone without a word, the cool metal, a final confirmation of the deal she had just made. As she walked away, she didn't look back. The phone vibrated an hour later as she sat in her car, parked in a deserted lot overlooking the city. She answered, her voice clipped and professional. Yes? You took the paper. Dante's voice came through, as smooth and calm as it had been in the club. I assume that means you've accepted the logic of our situation. Let's be clear, she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. This is not a partnership. This is a temporary, mutually beneficial exchange of information. That is all. Of course, he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. There will have to be rules then, for our exchange. Rule 1, Evelyn stated firmly. I do not participate in, nor do I condone, your methods. My investigation will follow the letter of the law. Rule 2, if in the course of this, I find actionable evidence against you or your organization, I will use it. I would expect nothing less, Dante said, unfazed. My rules are equally simple. The information I provide is for you and your wounded detective only. If it spreads through your department, our arrangement is terminated, and you will be left completely in the dark. In return, any intelligence you gather from your side, you share with me, immediately. Am I understood? Understood, she bit out, hating the position she was in. Good, he said. The line went silent for a moment. The name of the holding company is Prometheus Global. Start there. Let me know what your official channels can dig up. The line went dead. Evelyn stared at the phone, feeling as though she'd just signed a contract in blood. The next day was a study in contrasts. Evelyn began the slow, arduous process of navigating legal bureaucracy. She visited Rourke, gave him a heavily redacted version of the story. A confidential informant provided a lead on an offshore company and had him initiate a request for international financial records. The process, he warned her, could take weeks, even months, bogged down in treaties and red tape. Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Dante made a single 10-minute call to a contact in Zurich. He didn't ask for records or warrants. He asked for a name and a vulnerability. By the time Evelyn was leaving her office that evening, frustrated and empty-handed, the burner phone rang again. Prometheus Global is a shell, as we knew, Dante's voice said without preamble. It was created by a man named Elias Thorne. That's the name you're looking for. Evelyn was already striding back to her office, her heart pounding. Elias Thorne, she repeated, logging into her secure terminal. She ran the name through federal and international law enforcement databases. At first, nothing. The name was a ghost, but she was a skilled researcher. She cross-referenced it with military service records, and finally she got a hit. A heavily redacted file appeared on her screen. Elias Thorne, former CIA, Special Activities Division, an expert in covert action and destabilization. His record was a string of blacked-out mission locations and vague commendations, followed by a dishonorable discharge for unspecified misconduct 10 years ago. He had officially dropped off the face of the earth. A cold dread washed over her, far deeper than her earlier anger and frustration. This wasn't a mob war. This wasn't about territory or smuggling routes. She had been preparing for a fight against organized crime, but the man Dante's contact had unearthed was something else entirely. He was a professional shadow, a man trained by the government to topple regimes, now operating as a free agent. She looked at the war room board, at the face of Dante Moretti, her sworn enemy. For the first time, she realized he might not be the most dangerous monster in the game. Her deal with the devil was no longer just a compromise for justice. It was a necessity for survival. The burner phone buzzed, and Evelyn answered with the cold efficiency that now defined their conversations. She relayed her findings on Elias Thorne, her voice a flat monotone as she detailed his CIA past and dishonorable discharge. On the other end of the line, Dante was silent for a moment, processing. This changed the texture of the threat. This wasn't a brutish power grab from a rival family. It was a strategic dismantling by a trained professional. It explains the precision of the abduction, Dante said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. My sources confirm Thorne has been in New Orleans for 6 months, operating under the name Mr. Fisher. He's been making inroads with the dock workers union, specifically the members who are unhappy with my leadership. He's targeting your power base, Evelyn stated, realizing the scope of his strategy. He's trying to cut the roots of the tree, Dante corrected. We need to know what he's offering them. There's an underground poker game tonight. A high-stakes affair attended by the union's second-in-command, a man named Silas Kane. He's ambitious and greedy, the perfect target for Thorne. You're coming with me. Evelyn almost laughed at the absurdity. Absolutely not. I am not walking into a back room full of your criminal associates. It's career suicide. Silas is expecting a threat from me. He'll be guarded, Dante countered, his logic infuriatingly sound. But he won't expect me to arrive with a sharp, beautiful lawyer on my arm. You are not a prosecutor tonight. You are an investment consultant from New York, my guest. Your presence is the one thing he won't be prepared for. It will put him off balance. 2 hours later, Evelyn found herself staring at her reflection. A box had been delivered to her apartment containing a stunning, midnight blue evening gown that was both elegant and dangerously alluring. Against her better judgment, she was playing his game. The poker game was held in the basement of a decadent, aging hotel in the French Quarter. The air was thick with the smell of cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and desperation. Men in expensive suits sat around felt tables, their faces illuminated in the low light, mountains of chips piled before them. It was a world she had only read about in indictments. It was Dante's world. He stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The gesture was meant for show, a sign of possession to the room, but the warmth of his touch through the thin fabric of her dress sent an unnerving jolt through her. Here, surrounded by criminals, his presence was an intimidating shield. She felt paradoxically safe next to the most dangerous man in the room. She watched him navigate the space. He didn't speak much, but his quiet authority was absolute. A nod here, a brief, cold glance there. Men who looked like killers gave him a wide berth. He wasn't just a boss. He was a king in his court. Eventually, they approached Silas Kane, a beefy man with a florid face and greedy eyes. Dante made the introductions, casting Evelyn as a brilliant legal mind, helping him vet a new port expansion project. While Dante kept Silas occupied with a discussion about union contracts, Evelyn used her skills. With an investment of this size, she interjected smoothly. My clients worry about stability. We've heard rumors of alternative leadership proposals for the docks, promises of a clean slate. Silas flinched, his eyes darting nervously toward Dante. Just talk, he blustered. Some guys get ideas. Ideas can be dangerous, Evelyn said, her voice deceptively sweet, especially when they're funded by men who prefer to operate from the shadows. A man like your Mr. Fisher. The color drained from Silas's face. He had confirmed it without saying a word. They had their link. The next day was Saturday, and Evelyn's office was a sanctuary of quiet order. She was surrounded by her own weapons, legal texts, city ordinances, and massive, rolled-up blueprints of the New Orleans Port Authority. If Thorne was targeting the docks, she would find his base of operations in the official records. The silence was broken by a soft click from the hallway door. She looked up to see Dante Moretti stepping into her office. He wore a simple black sweater and dark trousers, yet he looked as out of place as a panther in a sterile laboratory. Your building's security is a disgrace, he said, his eyes sweeping over her war room board with detached interest. What are you doing here? She demanded, standing up, her hand instinctively hovering near her desk drawer where her weapon was stored. You are looking in the wrong place, he said, ignoring her question. He walked over to the blueprint spread across her large conference table. You are looking for official records. A man like Thorne operates in the gaps, the blind spots. He was on her turf now, surrounded by the symbols of her power, the law books, the case files, the diplomas on the wall. He seemed less like a phantom and more like a man. He watched her for a moment, an unreadable expression in his gray eyes, a flicker of what might have been respect. What do you see? She asked, her curiosity overriding her hostility. His long finger traced a path over the complex map of warehouses and shipping lanes. I see what's there, he said, but I also know what isn't. You see a grid. I see a history. His finger stopped on a small, isolated square on the edge of the industrial canal. This warehouse. Number 7. Officially decommissioned after Hurricane Katrina. No power, no water, no registered owner. It's a derelict building, Evelyn said, dismissing it. It's the perfect shell, Dante countered, looking up at her. It has deep water access for quiet arrivals and is surrounded by a maze of old service roads for quiet departures. It doesn't officially exist, so no one is looking at it. It's a ghost on the map, exactly where a man like Thorne would hide. They stood over the table, inches apart, their shared gaze locked on the circled location. In the quiet of her office, a truce born of necessity had momentarily solidified. Her meticulous research and his underworld knowledge had intersected, producing a lead neither could have found alone. The line between their worlds had blurred, and in that shared space, a tense, undeniable current passed between them. They had their target. The silence in Evelyn's office was different now. It was no longer the empty silence of a late night at work, but a shared, charged quiet that hung in the space between her and Dante. The circled warehouse on the blueprint was a focal point, a tangible piece of common ground in a world where they were supposed to be on opposite sides of a war. A ghost on the map, Evelyn murmured, repeating his words. She looked up from the blueprint, her gaze meeting his. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Il Fantasma, the untouchable crime lord. She was looking at the strategist, the man who saw the city not just as a territory, but as a living, breathing entity with a history he knew intimately. How can you be so sure? Because I know how men like Thorne think, Dante replied, his voice a low thrum. They seek the places no one looks. And because my father used that warehouse 30 years ago for the same purpose, history repeats itself. He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. You believe in patterns, Miss Tran. In evidence and precedent, this is just a different kind of evidence. The mention of his father was a small, unexpected crack in his stoic facade. It was a glimpse into the legacy he carried, the world he had been born into. Evelyn felt a flicker of something she couldn't name, not sympathy, but a deeper, more complex understanding. "We need to see it," she said, her tone shifting from prosecutor to strategist. "A drive-by, see if there are any signs of activity." "My thoughts exactly," Dante agreed. "But not in your government. Issue sedan or my armored town car. We go quietly." An hour later, Evelyn found herself in the passenger seat of a nondescript, dark gray muscle car that was brutally fast and utterly anonymous. Dante drove with an effortless, focused economy of motion, his hands steady on the wheel as he navigated the labyrinthine streets leading to the industrial outskirts of the city. The confined space of the car amplified his presence. She was intensely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of expensive cologne and something uniquely his, something clean and cold, like winter air. The silence stretched, filled only by the low rumble of the engine. She decided to break it, to push at one of those cracks she'd glimpsed. "The scar," she said, her voice softer than she intended. She gestured toward her own temple. "How did you get it?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "A business dispute. From a long time ago. A reminder that chaos is the enemy of progress." It was a guarded answer, but the emotion behind it was real. "And is that what this is all about for you?" she pressed gently. "Order? Control?" He was silent for a full minute. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The cold edge was gone, replaced by a raw, quiet weariness that startled her. "I had a sister. Her name was Sophia. She was 12. She was killed in the crossfire of a war my father didn't control. She was collateral damage. Chaos." He paused, and in that brief silence, Evelyn could almost feel the weight of his entire world. "I do not allow for collateral damage. I control everything, so that never happens again." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever told her. In that moment, the fearsome phantom of New Orleans was gone, and in his place was a man forged in tragedy, a man who had built an empire of control to keep the chaos at bay. The monster, she was beginning to understand, had a reason for being a monster. "And you, Miss Tran?" he asked, turning the tables, his voice returning to its neutral, analytical tone. "A Yale law degree. You could be a partner in any white shoe firm in New York, making millions. Yet you're here, in a city that's sinking into the swamp, fighting a war you can't possibly win, for a salary that barely covers your rent." It was her turn to be exposed. "I grew up watching my father pay men for the privilege of not having his restaurant windows broken. I saw the fear in his eyes. I decided I would never feel that helpless again, and I would fight for the people who did." He glanced at her then, a quick, penetrating look. "So we are both fighting ghosts from our past," he murmured. They arrived at the perimeter of the industrial canal. Dante killed the engine, and they coasted to a stop in the shadow of a rusted-out water tower, 100 yards from Warehouse 7. The place was a ruin, its windows boarded up, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust and graffiti. But Dante was right. Faint, fresh tire tracks, barely visible on the cracked asphalt, led to a side gate. And on that gate, glinting in the weak afternoon sun, was a new, heavy-duty padlock. It was a single, glaring piece of modernity on a canvas of decay. Proof. They sat in silence for a long moment, the shared revelation hanging between them. They had both shown their scars, the hidden wounds that drove them. The masks had slipped, and in that shared vulnerability, the line between them, the lawyer and the criminal, the hunter and the hunted, had dissolved into something far more complicated and dangerously human. The drive back from the warehouse was a silent affair. The image of the glinting new padlock burned into both their minds. Dante pulled the car into the cavernous, empty garage beneath one of his downtown buildings, the engine's rumble dying into an echoing quiet. "A warrant is out of the question," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. She turned in her seat to face him. "The evidence is circumstantial at best. Fresh tire tracks and a new lock won't get me past a judge's secretary. Even if it did, it would tip him off. We'd be announcing our move. And a frontal assault is clumsy," Dante countered, his gaze intense. "Thorne's men are professionals. They'll have protocols, surveillance. Going in loud would be a suicide mission, and it would destroy any intelligence they have inside." They were at an impasse, her world of rules and his world of force both insufficient for the task. "So we become ghosts," Evelyn said, the idea forming in her mind. "We don't go through the door or over the wall. We go between the cracks, a covert entry. Plant a listening device. Get in and get out before he ever knows we were there." Dante looked at her, a slow, appreciative gleam in his gray eyes. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a fighter, willing to adapt her strategy to the terrain. You'd be willing to authorize an illegal search? I'm willing to bend the rules to stop a man who shoots cops in broad daylight, she retorted. I can get the device from Rourke's evidence locker and off the book's asset, but I don't have your expertise in breaking and entering. Then it's settled, Dante said, a finality in his tone that left no room for argument. We go in together, tonight. Hours later, they met in the back of a discreet auto body shop he owned. The smell of oil and cold steel filled the air. He handed her a lightweight set of black tactical gear. As she struggled with the unfamiliar straps of the vest, he stepped forward to help. His fingers brushed against hers as he adjusted a buckle, the brief contact sending a startling current through her veins. He was close enough for her to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken energy that had nothing to do with the dangerous mission ahead. He showed her how to use a small, high-tensile wire cutter, his large hands enveloping hers, guiding her movements. His touch was firm, professional, yet it felt impossibly intimate. They were preparing for a battle, but it felt like a slow, dangerous dance. Under the cover of a moonless sky, the warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast. They moved in perfect sync, a silent waltz of shadows. He cut the lock with a single, practiced snip. They slipped inside, the vast, dark space swallowing them whole. The interior was just as they'd suspected. It wasn't a den of thugs, it was a nerve center. Racks of humming computer servers blinked with faint green lights. Large digital maps of the city were projected on one wall. Key infrastructure points, the port, the power grid, City Hall, all highlighted. This wasn't just a takeover. It was a planned decapitation of the city's operational core. Evelyn's blood ran cold. She pulled the small, sophisticated listening device from her pack, ready to place it on the main server rack. Suddenly, a low rumble from outside. The distinct sound of a heavy truck approaching. Headlights swept across the high, grimy windows. Down! Dante's whisper was a harsh breath in her ear. He grabbed her, pulling her with him into a narrow, dark gap between two towering stacks of industrial crates. The space was impossibly tight. She was pressed flush against him, her front crushed against the hard planes of his chest. Her hands were trapped between them, her face turned to the side, her cheek resting against the fabric of his sweater. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her own frantic rhythm. The truck's engine idled outside, and the heavy tread of boots crunched on the gravel. They were closer than she'd thought. Her breath hitched, a gasp of pure adrenaline. In an instant, Dante's hand came up, not with violence, but with a surprising gentleness, and covered her mouth. His fingers were firm, his thumb resting just below her lower lip. The world shrank to the pitch-black space between the crates. All she knew was the solid wall of his body, the scent of him, the heat of his hand on her face. The fear of discovery was completely overshadowed by the overwhelming, terrifying intimacy of the moment. The footsteps outside faded as the patrol moved to the other side of the warehouse. The immediate danger passed, but neither of them moved. He slowly, reluctantly, lowered his hand. She could still feel the phantom touch on her skin. In the darkness, she looked up, and though she could barely see him, she could feel the full weight of his gaze. The professional masks they wore had been stripped away by the adrenaline and the darkness, leaving only a man and a woman on the brink of something undeniable. The waltz had stopped, leaving them stranded, face to face, in the heart of the storm. The morning after the infiltration, the world felt tilted on its axis. Evelyn sat at her desk, a steaming cup of coffee untouched, staring at the secure laptop she'd brought from home. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the suffocating darkness of the warehouse, the feeling of Dante's body pressed against hers, the warmth of his hand on her face. It was a memory that was equal parts terrifying and intoxicating, and it made concentrating on anything else impossible. When the burner phone finally vibrated, she snatched it up, her heart giving a nervous jolt. Anything? Dante's voice was clipped, strictly business. He was building walls, trying to reset their dynamic to what it was before. She could hear the effort in his tone. Just the ambient hum of servers so far, she replied, matching his professional tone. The device is active. Now we wait. The waiting was a unique form of torture. They kept the line open, the phone resting on her desk on speaker, a strange, silent link between her sterile office and his shadowy penthouse. For hours, there was nothing but the low electronic thrum. They were two enemies, miles apart, sharing a silence heavy with unspoken words. Then, voices. The audio was crisp and clear. One voice was American, cold and precise, unmistakably Thorne. The other had a slight Eastern European accent. Phase 1 preparations are 90% complete, the second voice said. The port's network is vulnerable. My team can initiate the lockdown sequence on your command. And the physical disruption? Thorne asked. The Bienville substation is a soft target. The Union diversion will draw emergency services to the west, leaving the east grid exposed. The blackout will be widespread. It will amplify the chaos of the port shutdown. Listening, Evelyn felt a knot of ice form in her stomach. She began typing furiously, cross-referencing city infrastructure maps and emergency protocols. The Bienville substation powers the entire downtown financial district and the emergency response headquarters, she said into the phone, her voice a low, urgent whisper. If it goes down at the same time the port is hit with a cyber attack, the city will be paralyzed. They won't be able to coordinate a response, Dante finished, his voice grim. He understood the strategy instantly. They'll be blind and deaf. The economic damage would be catastrophic. They both fell silent, absorbing the sheer scale of the plan. This wasn't about smuggling routes or Union control. This was a strategic attack designed to bring the city of New Orleans to its knees. Thorne wasn't trying to take a piece of the pie. He was trying to burn the whole bakery to the ground. In the ensuing chaos, a new power structure could be built from the ashes, one controlled by him. Then, the conversation from the listening device shifted, revealing something even more alarming. And the patron? The European man asked. Are they pleased with the progress? Our patron understands that precision takes time, Thorne replied coolly. They will be at the museum gala tomorrow night. I will deliver the final timeline to them then. Discreetly. Evelyn and Dante processed this new piece of intelligence at the same time. Thorne, the ex-CIA ghost, the man they saw as the ultimate threat, was just an instrument. He was a weapon being wielded by someone else. Someone with the money and influence to attend the exclusive Lelong Foundation Gala at the New Orleans Museum of Art, the biggest high society event of the year. The conspiracy didn't stop with a disgraced spy in a derelict warehouse. It reached into the gilded halls of the city's elite. Suddenly, the awkwardness between them, the memory of the previous night, seemed insignificant, a frivolous distraction in the face of this overwhelming threat. This is no longer just my problem, Dante said, his voice hard as forged steel. The unspoken emotion was clear. This was an attack on his city, a violation of the order he had built, however brutal. This threatens everything. Evelyn looked at her own war room board. Her neatly drawn lines of organized crime seemed laughably simple now. She couldn't take this to D.A. Abernathy, or even the FBI. They had no actionable proof, only an illegal recording. And if the patron was a prominent figure, a warning might as well be a death sentence for her and anyone she told. She was truly on her own. Except she wasn't. He is a threat to everyone, Dante, she said, and for the first time she used his given name without a trace of animosity. It felt natural. The line between them, prosecutor and criminal, justice and sin, had evaporated. There was no longer his world and her world. There was only the battlefield in front of them, and the common enemy who wanted to set it all on fire. The museum gala is tomorrow night, she stated, her voice filled with a new, grim resolve. Then that's where we go, he replied. The weight of their discovery pressed down on Evelyn, a physical force that made the air in her office feel thin and hard to breathe. The conspiracy was a hydra, a monster with heads in the darkest alleys and the most opulent ballrooms of New Orleans. She felt small, outmatched, and utterly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained her for days had finally leached away, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. You sound tired, Dante's voice said through the burner phone. It wasn't an accusation, but a simple statement of fact, delivered with a surprising gentleness. I'm fine, she lied, rubbing her temples. No, you're not, he countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. You can't run on coffee and adrenaline forever. The body keeps score. Lock your office. I'm sending a car to your location in 10 minutes. It will take you to a secure apartment. Don't argue. Before she could protest, he hung up. For once, she was too tired to fight. She did as she was told, feeling a strange sense of release in surrendering control for just a moment. The apartment was a minimalist space on a high floor of a discreet, unnamed building, with a stunning view of the city lights. It was clean and impersonal, but it felt like a sanctuary, far removed from the worlds of both law and crime. Dante was already there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was alone. On the sleek marble island in the kitchen were 2 containers of what smelled like the best pho in the city, a simple, comforting meal. He hadn't ordered an extravagant feast. He had brought her a taste of her own heritage, a quiet gesture of understanding that disarmed her more than any show of power possibly could. They ate in a comfortable silence, the unspoken tension of the past few days melting away into a shared exhaustion. The war room, the listening devices, the impending doom, all of it seemed to fade into the background, leaving just two people sharing a meal against the backdrop of the glittering city. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted after a long while, the confession whispered into the quiet room. "Not of Thorn. I'm scared of what happens if we fail, and I'm scared of what this alliance is costing me." Dante looked at her, his gaze unwavering. The mask of Il Fantasma was gone, leaving only the man who had lost his sister to chaos. "Sophia, she loved the Mardi Gras parades," he said, his voice soft with memory. "She would sit on my shoulders so she could see everything. She believed there was real magic in the world." He paused, his eyes unfocused, looking at a ghost only he could see. "When she died, the magic died with her. I spent the next 15 years building a world of logic and control so nothing could ever hurt me like that again. But Thorn, he isn't chaos. He is a different kind of logic, a colder one. And that is a threat I have never faced before." It was a confession that mirrored her own. They were both rulers of their own, carefully constructed kingdoms, hers of law, his of order, and a foreign power had come to burn them both down. He saw the exhaustion etched on her face, the vulnerability in her eyes. He stood up and walked over to where she sat on the sofa. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently push a stray strand of hair back from her cheek. His fingers brushed against her skin, a touch as light as a spark, and everything ignited. The dam of professionalism, of fear, of hatred and mistrust finally broke. She looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and in that gaze, there was a shared, desperate understanding. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a frantic, desperate act. It was the culmination of every moment of shared danger, every charged glance, every whispered confession. It was a raw, aching release of tension, a surrender to the one force in their lives that was utterly illogical and uncontrollable. It was a moment of profound weakness, a shared admission that they couldn't face the coming storm alone. He pulled her to her feet, his hands tangling in her hair, and hers clutching the front of his sweater as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. They found a temporary, passionate solace in each other, a desperate anchor in the eye of the hurricane. Evelyn woke to the pale light of dawn filtering through the windows. She was in a strange bed, wrapped in clean white sheets and an unfamiliar sense of peace. Dante was asleep beside her, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen. The hard lines softened. For a moment, he was not a kingpin or a phantom, just a man. Then reality intruded. The gala was tonight. The fight for their city, for their lives, was only hours away. He stirred, his gray eyes opening to find hers. The new, fragile intimacy hung in the air between them. Their moment of weakness was over. It was time to put their armor back on. But now, as they prepared to face their common enemy, they were no longer just allies. They were something far more dangerous and far more powerful. The morning after their shared night, the safe house was filled with a tense, focused energy. The intimacy of the dawn had been replaced by the cold reality of the coming night. The mission was everything. Dante laid out the plan with precision. He had secured 2 invitations to the Lilong Foundation Gala, while a box from a high-end boutique containing a breathtaking emerald green gown was delivered for Evelyn. He presented her with a pair of diamond and emerald earrings. "They are beautiful," she said, her voice quiet. "They are also a high-fidelity communication system," he replied, his tone all business. "I will be the distraction. Everyone knows of Dante Moretti, the recluse. My presence will draw their eyes. You will be the enigma on my arm. No one knows who you are. You will be the one who can move, watch, and listen without scrutiny. Tonight, you are the ghost." She looked at him, understanding the significance of his words. He was trusting her to be the operative, to be his eyes and ears in a room full of sharks. It was the ultimate show of faith. When they entered the grand hall of the New Orleans Museum of Art, a ripple of whispers followed them. Dante was a magnetic, intimidating presence in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and Evelyn, in the stunning green gown, felt like a queen. His hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a constant, grounding pressure. The gesture was a declaration to the room, but for her, it was a lifeline in a sea of unknown enemies. They moved through the glittering crowd, champagne flutes in hand, playing their parts to perfection. Through the earrings, a silent conversation flowed between them. Augustus Thorne, by the Degas, Her voice murmured in his ear, a whisper only he could hear. "The shipping magnate. He's a known associate of the councilman you mentioned. Thorn is old money and old-fashioned greed," Dante's voice replied in her own ear. "He lacks the sophistication for a plan like this. Keep your eye on the man he's talking to, Judge Miller. He has the power to sign off on citywide emergency measures. He could legitimize a power grab." Evelyn scanned the room, her eyes cataloging every powerful figure, every discreetly exchanged glance. Then she saw him. Elias Thorn, looking urbane and anonymous in a tuxedo, was moving towards the less crowded impressionist wing. Her heart began to beat faster. She followed him with her gaze, watching as he stopped before a man whose back was turned to her. When the man turned, the air left Evelyn's lungs. The world seemed to tilt, the music and chatter of the gala fading into a dull roar. It was District Attorney Frank Abernathy, her boss, her mentor, the man who had praised her, guided her, and acted as a surrogate father to her throughout her career. She watched in horror as Abernathy, with a smile on his face, discreetly passed a small, metallic object, an encrypted flash drive to Thorn. The exchange was seamless, practiced, a betrayal hidden in plain sight. She must have made a sound, a choked gasp, because Dante's hand tightened on her back. "Evelyn, what is it? Report." She couldn't form words. Her mind was a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. At that moment, as if feeling her gaze, Abernathy looked across the room, his eyes locked with hers. He saw her standing there, a vision in green, with the city's most notorious phantom at her side. The warm, fatherly mask he had worn for years dissolved in an instant, replaced by a look of pure, cold calculation. He knew, and he knew that she knew. "We have to go. Now." Dante's voice was urgent in her ear. He didn't need an explanation. He had seen the look on her face. He guided her swiftly through the crowd, his body a shield, heading not for the main entrance, but for a side door leading to the museum's sculpture garden. The moment they stepped outside, the sky opened up. A sudden, violent torrent of rain lashed down, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for her betrayal. Evelyn stumbled to a halt, gasping for breath, the rain instantly soaking her hair and gown. She leaned against a cold, marble statue, the world spinning around her. "Abernathy," she choked out, the name tasting like poison. It was Abernathy. He's the patron. The words hung in the stormy air, a confession of a world shattered. Dante came to her, his expression grim. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, dripping from his sharp jawline. He didn't offer platitudes or apologies. He simply stepped into her space, cupping her face with his hands, forcing her to look at him. And in the middle of the torrential downpour, he kissed her. This kiss was not like the desperate, passionate embrace in the safe house. It was a kiss of profound, grounding solace. It was a silent, fierce promise in the heart of the storm. "Your world has just been torn apart," it said. "But you are not floating away. I am here. I will hold you down." When he pulled back, they were both drenched, the storm raging around them. "He knows you saw him," Dante said, his voice low and intense, cutting through the sound of the rain. "This changes everything. You can't go home. You can't go to your office. From this moment on, you can't trust anyone. Only me." She looked into his steel-gray eyes and knew he was right. She was an exile from her own life, a fugitive from the very system of justice she had sworn to uphold. And her only ally was the man who was meant to be her greatest enemy. The ride from the museum was a blur of rain-streaked city lights. Dante's car moved through the night with a silent, lethal purpose, a phantom slipping through the veins of the city. Evelyn sat numbly in the passenger seat, the emerald dress now cold and heavy against her skin, a relic from a life that had ended only an hour ago. Dante didn't take her back to the impersonal corporate apartment. Instead, he drove them to the stately, old-money elegance of the Garden District. He pulled into a hidden driveway, the gates closing silently behind them, and led her into a magnificent historic home shrouded by ancient oak trees and veils of Spanish moss. This was no safe house. This was a home. His home. A place of quiet power and deep roots. A sanctuary far more secure than any modern penthouse. Inside, a fire was already crackling in a marble fireplace. Dante disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick cashmere blanket and a snifter of brandy. He wrapped the blanket around her shivering shoulders and pressed the glass into her hands. He didn't speak, offering no empty words of comfort. He simply gave her space, his steady, silent presence a bulwark against the storm raging inside her. And the storm did rage. The shock of Abernathy's betrayal finally gave way to a tidal wave of grief and white-hot fury. She paced the length of the antique rug before the fire, her mind a courtroom where Frank Abernathy was on trial. Every memory was brought forth as evidence. Every fatherly smile, every word of encouragement, every time he'd said he was proud of her, it was all re-examined, twisted, and tainted by the night's horrifying revelation. Was it all a lie? The mentorship? The belief he'd shown in her? Or was she just a pawn he was grooming, a useful tool in his grand, corrupt design? This was her confession, not spoken aloud, but a silent, brutal admission to herself. She confessed that she had been willfully blind, that her faith in the system, in the clear line between good and evil, had been a form of childish naivete. She had built her life on a foundation of lies, and now it had crumbled to dust beneath her feet. The law she had worshipped was just a weapon, and the man she had admired was the one pointing it at the city's heart. Her black and white world was dead. In its place was a landscape of infinite, terrifying gray. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. He had seen betrayal before, but he had never seen it shatter someone so completely. He felt a surge of cold, protective fury on her behalf. Abernathy had not just created an enemy in Dante Moretti tonight. He had turned his most brilliant protege into a weapon that would now be aimed directly at him. He saw the grief in her eyes slowly burn away, replaced by the embers of a cold, hard resolve. The idealist was gone. In her place was a woman with nothing left to lose. Finally, she stopped pacing and turned to him, her eyes clear and sharp. The storm had passed. "He'll issue a warrant for my arrest by morning," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He'll say I've been compromised, that I'm a rogue prosecutor working with the mob. He'll fabricate evidence to show I've been feeding you information for months. He'll use every tool in his arsenal to discredit me and hunt me down." She was no longer the victim of the conspiracy. She was analyzing it, dissecting her enemy's strategy. Dante nodded slowly, his respect for her growing with every word. "He will use the law to make you a criminal. How do we fight that?" "We don't," she replied, a dangerous light in her eyes. "We don't fight the law. We fight the man. We can't prove our innocence in a system he controls. Our only option is to prove his guilt. We need to find his weakness. We need to find what was on that flash drive." The power dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer a criminal and a lawyer in a tense alliance. They were equals, partners. She, the strategist with intimate knowledge of the enemy's mind. He, the commander with the resources to execute her plan. "The drive is the key," she continued. "Thorne has it. We have to get it from him before he carries out the attack." Dante walked to his desk and picked up a secure satellite phone, his gaze locked with hers. There was a silent agreement, a shared understanding that they had just crossed the final line. There was no going back. He dialed a number. "Marco," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Wake everyone up. The plan has changed. We're no longer gathering intelligence." Evelyn stood beside him, the borrowed blanket clutched around her. She was no longer a prosecutor. She was a fugitive, a strategist, a woman who had lost her faith but found her purpose in the ashes. Dante finished his call, a cold promise in his eyes. "We're going to war." The historic study of Dante's Garden District home had transformed into a war room. Antique maps in gilded frames now shared wall space with glowing monitors displaying encrypted data streams. Marco and two of Dante's most trusted specialists, a tech expert named Julian and a former Special Forces operative named Sophia, a coincidence of name that was not lost on Dante, worked with quiet, focused intensity. Evelyn stood at the center of it all, not as a guest or a liability, but as a commander. When Marco had initially cast a questioning glance her way, Dante had silenced him with a single look that conveyed an unmistakable message. "She speaks with my authority." "Thorne knows he's been identified," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and clear, addressing the room. "He will have abandoned the warehouse. He'll be somewhere secure, insulated, preparing to launch the attack. We're not looking for a hideout anymore. We're looking for a launch pad." While Dante's team began the painstaking work of tracking Thorne's digital and physical footprint through the city's surveillance network, Evelyn turned to Julian. "I need access to the DA's cold case server. I need files from 16 years ago. Specifically, cases that Frank Abernathy personally supervised and had sealed." Julian's fingers flew across his keyboard. "That's a fortress, inside a fortress. But I like a challenge. Look for a corporate malfeasance case that was dismissed suddenly," Evelyn instructed, a nagging memory from her early days as an intern surfacing in her mind. A big one. Something that involved a protected witness who was unexpectedly silenced. For an hour, the only sounds in the room were the clicking of keys and the low murmur of Dante's men. Then, Julian's voice cut through the tension. I'm in. Found it. The state versus Argus International. Argus wanted to build a petrochemical plant on protected wetlands. Abernathy had an inside man, a lead witness set to blow the whole conspiracy open. What happened? Dante asked, stepping closer. The witness and his family were killed. A single-car accident on the causeway, ruled accidental due to bad weather. The witness was the only one who could tie the CEO directly to the bribery. The case fell apart. Abernathy lost, Julian reported. He brought the witness's file up on the main screen. The file was sealed to protect the integrity of the failed investigation. Evelyn stared at the screen, her blood running cold as she read the name of the deceased witness, Michael Moretti. She looked at Dante. His face was a mask of stone, but she saw the shock register in the depths of his gray eyes. Michael was my father's brother, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. We were told it was an accident. A tragic, unavoidable accident. The buried truth was beginning to surface. The assassination of his uncle, disguised as a tragedy, was the event that had destabilized his father's organization, creating the chaos that had ultimately led to his sister Sophia's death. It was all connected. There's more, Evelyn said, her mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Who was the CEO of Argus International back then? Julian typed for a moment. A man named Alistair Cromwell. He retired a few years after the case was dismissed, rebranding himself as one of the city's great philanthropists. He's a primary benefactor of the Lilong Foundation. The room fell silent. The motive, twisted and dark, was finally clear. This wasn't a simple power grab. This was a 16-year-old vendetta. Abernathy wasn't working for the city's elite. He was hunting them. He had lost his war in the courtroom, so now he was fighting it in the shadows, using Thorne as his instrument of chaos. The gala wasn't a meeting with his boss. It was a gathering of his targets. He was planning to burn down the corrupt old guard he could never defeat with the law and seize control from the ashes. The revelation made the fight intensely personal for Dante. This was about his family, about the ghost that had haunted his life, about a truth that had been buried for over a decade. He looked at Evelyn, a silent understanding passing between them. She had not only given him a strategy to fight a war, she had unearthed the history of his own life. Just as the weight of the discovery settled over the room, a sharp beep came from Julian's console. I've got him, the tech expert announced, his voice sharp with excitement. Thorne, he's using a heavily encrypted satellite link, but the signal is bouncing off a repeater downtown. I've triangulated his position. He's not in some bunker. He's in the penthouse suite of the Omni Royal Orleans Hotel. A map flashed on the screen, a red dot pulsing over the heart of the French Quarter. They knew the motive. They knew the target. And now, they knew where the enemy's general was hiding. Dante turned to his team, his face set like granite. Gear up. The hunt is over. It's time to collect. The operation to hit the Omni Hotel was planned with the swift, brutal efficiency of a military strike. In a darkened surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, Evelyn sat next to Julian, a bank of monitors illuminating their tense faces. This was her battlefield now, not a courtroom, but a command center. Her job was to be the eye in the sky, the voice of reason guiding the soldiers on the ground. Hotel security mainframe is bypassed, Julian murmured, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. I have control of the elevators and CCTV on the penthouse floor. You're clear. Copy that. Dante's voice, calm and steady, came through her earpiece. We're moving in. On the screen, she watched 3 heat signatures. Dante, Marco, and Sophia exit the service stairs and approach the penthouse suite. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was directing the most dangerous man in the city on an illegal raid. A thought so treasonous and surreal she couldn't fully process it. The hallway is clear. No guards visible, she reported, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. Police response time to a penthouse alarm at this location is approximately 6 minutes. You're on the clock. They breached the door with a silent, controlled explosion of force. Evelyn watched on the monitor as they swept into the suite, moving with a deadly, practiced grace. The penthouse was unnervingly neat. Laptops hummed on a long table, and a server rack blinked in a corner, but the suite was empty. A ghost ship. He's not here. Marco's voice growled with frustration. It's a trap. As if on cue, the half-dozen television screens in the penthouse flickered to life simultaneously. Elias Thorne's face appeared, crisp and clear in a live feed. He was not in a hotel room but a dark, industrial-looking space. He was smiling, a look of calm, intellectual superiority in his eyes. Dante Moretti, Thorne said, his voice echoing through the suite and into Evelyn's earpiece. Il Fantasma, I must admit, I'm a little disappointed. Frank described you as a master strategist, but this was all far too predictable. Dante stood motionless in the center of the room, a predator realizing he'd walked into a cage. Where are you, Thorn? Where I need to be, Thorn replied smoothly. Not that it matters. You've come for the drive, I presume. The leash Abernathy thinks he holds me on? By all means, it's yours. He gestured with his head to the large desk in the center of the room. Lying there, small and innocuous, was the metallic flash drive. Abernathy. Frank. The name still felt like a betrayal on her tongue. Why? Evelyn found herself whispering into the comms. A question meant for Dante, for herself, for the man on the screen. As if hearing her, Thorn's eyes seemed to look directly into the hidden camera. Why? Because men like Frank Abernathy, with their petty vendettas, are just as pathetic as the corrupt old men they despise. And men like Dante Moretti, who profit from the rot in the system. You are the system. I'm not here to help one side beat the other. I'm here to burn the board. A new series of windows opened up on the screens behind Thorn, lines of code scrolling at an impossible speed. A map of the city's power grid pulsed with red alerts. Abernathy wanted revenge, Thorn continued, his voice taking on a zealous intensity. I just wanted the keys to the kingdom. He gave them to me. In the van, Julian swore loudly. He's done it. The attack has been initiated. Port mainframe is under assault. The grid is going down. He's launched it ahead of schedule. The flash drive is my parting gift to you, Thorn said with a final chilling smile. Use it. Expose Abernathy. Ruin him. His arrest will only add another layer to the beautiful, beautiful chaos that is about to descend. He was a useful pawn to get my pieces in position, but the game is mine now. The screens went black. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then, the city's emergency sirens began their mournful, rising wail in the distance. Grab the drive, Evelyn commanded, her voice sharp and authoritative. Get out now. He used you as a diversion. Dante snatched the flash drive from the desk as Marco and Sophia moved to the door. As they sprinted for the exit, the lights in the penthouse flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into the emergency-lit darkness. Through the van's windshield, Evelyn watched in horror as the glittering skyline of New Orleans blinked out, block by block, succumbing to an encroaching, unnatural night. They had the evidence to destroy their enemy, but it was a victory that tasted like ash. Thorn had not only outplayed them, he had used them to sacrifice his own king, clearing the board for an endgame she couldn't begin to fathom. The city was falling, and the real war had just begun. The journey back to the Garden District was a descent into a modern hell. Dante's car moved through a city that was bleeding chaos. With the traffic lights dead, intersections had become snarled battlegrounds of blaring horns. The wail of sirens was a constant, directionless scream. On the sidewalks, crowds gathered, their faces lit by the blue glow of their phones, a mixture of fear and manic excitement in their eyes. Thorn's chaos was taking root. Dante's home was an island of tranquility in the maelstrom. The house hummed with the quiet, confident power of its own generators, a bastion of light and order in a city rapidly losing both. In the war room, the atmosphere was electric. Julian immediately plugged the flash drive into a secure, isolated terminal and began the process of breaking Thorn's military-grade encryption. While he worked, Dante brought up a satellite news feed on the main monitor. The face of District Attorney Frank Abernathy filled the screen. He stood at a podium, flanked by the police chief, the picture of a stoic leader in a time of crisis. His voice was grave, authoritative. My fellow citizens, he began, in the past hour, our city has been the victim of a coordinated and cowardly terrorist attack. This was not a random power failure. This was a deliberate assault on our way of life, orchestrated by criminal elements seeking to sow chaos for their own gain. He paused, his expression hardening. Our intelligence indicates that the mastermind of this attack is the notorious crime lord, Dante Moretti. Dante's face, a grainy surveillance photo, flashed on the screen. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. Furthermore, Abernathy continued, his voice laced with false sorrow, it is my grim duty to report that one of our own, Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Tran, has been a key accomplice in this plot. It appears she has been a compromised agent for months, feeding Moretti information and aiding his treasonous plans. Her face, her official DA headshot, filled the screen. She is considered armed, dangerous, and a traitor to this city. The betrayal was so audacious, so complete, that Evelyn could only stare in stunned silence. He wasn't just framing them. He was using the crisis he had engineered to anoint himself the city's savior and brand them its ultimate villains. "I'm in," Julian announced, his voice cutting through the shock. "The drive is open." On his monitor, a complex file structure appeared. It contained everything: the plan for the attack, the financial records tracing back to Abernathy's secret accounts, and uncensored audio files of his conversations with Thorne. It was the proof they needed. But there was another folder, one Abernathy had clearly intended for Thorne to use against them. It contained a masterpiece of deception. Meticulously doctored emails between Evelyn's work account and a dummy account. Falsified bank statements showing huge cash deposits into an offshore account in her name. And the crown jewel, a chillingly convincing audio file, patched together from years of her recorded courtroom statements and private conversations in Abernathy's office, in which she appeared to be confessing her allegiance to Dante and her role in the plot. "My God," Evelyn whispered. "The drive was never for Thorne. It was Abernathy's endgame. He was going to have Thorne leak this after the attack to frame us, to tie up all the loose ends." Thorne, in his hubris, had simply handed them their own execution order. "We release the real files now," Marco growled. "All of it. Let the city see who the real traitor is." "No," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. The strategist in her mind was overriding the wounded woman. "Think. The city is in a panic. Abernathy has positioned himself as the sole authority. If we release this now, he'll call it fake, mob propaganda. In the chaos, who would people believe? We'd shatter what little faith they have left and create total anarchy. That's what Thorne wants." As the men argued, the burner phone, forgotten on the desk, began to ring. An unknown number. Evelyn looked at Dante, who gave her a slight nod. She answered, her hand trembling. "You always were too smart for your own good, Evelyn," Frank Abernathy's voice said. It was calm, cold, and stripped of all its former warmth. "I gave you every chance to have a brilliant career. I treated you like a daughter, and you chose to side with the filth I've spent my life fighting." "The man I admired is dead," she replied, her own voice like ice. "He doesn't have to be," Abernathy said, making his final move. "It's not too late. Give him up. Tell the world he kidnapped you, that you were a victim. I can still protect you. I can sell that story. You can be a hero." He was offering her a gilded cage, a way back. All she had to do was sacrifice Dante and live with the lie forever. "Go to hell, Frank," she said, and hung up the phone. The final bridge was burned. She turned back to the others, her eyes blazing with a new, dangerous clarity. "We can't just dump the data," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "We have to be smarter than him. He's using the media as his weapon, so we'll use it as ours." She looked at Julian. "Get me a secure, untraceable line. Find me Lisa Chang at the Times, Picayune. She's the only investigative reporter in this city who has the guts to stand up to Abernathy." Her decision was made. They wouldn't just fight back. They would control the narrative. The war for New Orleans had just become a war for the truth. The city's descent into chaos was a symphony conducted by Frank Abernathy. Immediately following his broadcast, the news channels became his personal propaganda machine. Evelyn watched, her stomach churning, as live footage showed a SWAT team battering down the door of her own apartment. They paraded out with boxes of evidence, a carefully staged performance for the cameras. Minutes later, the same scene unfolded at her office. She was being erased, her life and career publicly dismantled and replaced by the image of a traitor. Simultaneously, reports flooded in of coordinated raids on businesses across the city: restaurants, shipping offices, and warehouses, all known to be under the Argent Syndicate's control. Abernathy wasn't just hunting for them. He was systematically ripping Dante's empire apart at the seams, using the full, righteous power of the law as his weapon. The walls were closing in. Dante's fortified home had become a gilded cage. "He's not just cutting off the head of the snake," Marco observed grimly, watching the newsfeed. "He's setting fire to the whole damn nest." Amidst the growing sense of dread, Evelyn focused on her plan. There was no time for despair. Julian worked his magic, establishing a heavily encrypted, untraceable voice over IP call. A moment later, Evelyn was speaking to the one person she hoped was still untouchable, Lisa Chang. The reporter's voice was sharp, skeptical, and exhausted. "Miss Chang, my name is Evelyn Tran," she said, her own voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I know what you've heard about me. I'm telling you it's a lie. District Attorney Abernathy is the man behind the blackout. I have proof." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's a hell of an accusation, Miss Tran. Right now you're the most wanted woman in the country. Why should I believe you?" "Because a good reporter always follows the story, not the narrative," Evelyn countered. "I'm sending your device a small, encrypted data packet. It's an unedited audio file of a conversation. It will be enough to prove I'm telling the truth. After you've heard it, you'll know why you have to help me." She gave Lisa the instructions for a dead drop, a place and time to retrieve the full flash drive. After a tense moment, the reporter agreed. "Be careful, Miss Tran. If you're telling the truth, you're not the only one in danger." The air in the war room was thick with a fragile, desperate hope. This was it. Their one shot to fight back. Dante chose Sophia, his most skilled operative, to make the drop. They watched on a network of hacked traffic cameras as she moved through the darkened city, a ghost in the chaos. She arrived at the designated spot, a deserted newspaper kiosk in a small, quiet park. Packages in place, Sophia's voice whispered through the comms. Awaiting pickup. They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, movement. Not Lisa Chang. From 3 directions at once, black-clad SWAT teams swarmed the kiosk, laser sights cutting through the darkness. It was a perfectly executed ambush. "Compromised! Abort!" Dante's voice was a harsh command. A firefight erupted. Sophia, a blur of motion, returned fire, using the chaos to retreat into the shadows. On the monitors, Evelyn saw the flash drive, their only hope, skitter across the pavement and disappear under the kiosk as the firefight intensified. It was gone, unreachable. Sophia's voice came through, ragged and breathless as she escaped through the back alleys. "I'm clear, but the package is lost. They were waiting for me. They knew." The hope in the room died, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. Lisa Chang had either betrayed them, or, more likely, her communications were being monitored. Abernathy's reach was absolute. There were no secure channels. There was no one left to trust. Everything was falling apart. "This was your plan." Dante's voice was a low snarl, not directed at Evelyn, but at the world, at the loss of control. The frustration and rage of a cornered king. "Trusting the system, the press, it's all rotten. And what was your plan?" Evelyn shot back, her own control shattering under the weight of their failure. "To shoot our way out? This isn't a mob war, Dante. We can't win by force. It was our only chance." The words hung in the air, raw and painful. They weren't angry at each other. They were angry at the dying of the light, at the hopelessness of their situation. The argument faded, leaving only a shared, desolate silence. Dante's shoulders slumped in a rare moment of defeat. He walked to the window, looking out at the darkened city that was once his kingdom. "He knows we're in this district now," he said, his voice quiet, resigned. "He's closing the net. We can't stay here." He turned, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Marco, Julian, burn it. Wipe the servers, melt the hard drives, destroy everything. We're going dark, completely." He looked at Evelyn, his eyes holding a mixture of apology and determination. "I have one place left. A final resort. It's not like this. It's nothing, but it's safe." He extended a hand to her. As she took it, she knew this was the end of the war as they'd fought it. They were abandoning their castle, their intelligence, their resources. They were becoming fugitives, ghosts running from a city that wanted them dead, with nothing left but the clothes on their backs and the desperate, fragile trust they had in each other. The escape from the Garden District was a jarring return to the raw, chaotic reality of the city. They weren't in an armored sedan, but an old, beaten-up Ford pickup that Dante had kept hidden in the back of his garage for just such an occasion. It smelled of rust and gasoline, a ghost from a working-class life he had long since left behind. He drove without speaking, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the dark, unfamiliar streets of the blacked-out city. They left the grand avenues and manicured lawns behind, heading south, deeper into the swampy, forgotten parts of Louisiana that bordered the city. The air grew thick with the smell of salt marsh and damp earth. Finally, he turned down a narrow, overgrown dirt track that seemed to disappear into the bayou itself. At the end of it, nestled under the gnarled branches of a massive cypress tree, was a small, dilapidated fishing shack. It stood on stilts over the dark, brackish water, its wood weathered to a silver gray by 100 years of sun and storms. This was his final sanctuary, a place beyond the reach of his wealth and power, a place that belonged only to his memory. Inside, the shack was a single, dusty room. A simple cot was pushed against one wall, a few fishing rods against another. It was the complete antithesis of the opulent home they had just fled. This was not a place of power, it was a place of disappearance. Dante found an old lantern, and after a few tries, its flame cast a warm, flickering glow over the small space. He watched as Evelyn took in their new reality, the blanket from his luxurious home still clutched around her shoulders, looking utterly out of place. He saw the strength in her posture, but also the deep, bone-deep weariness in her eyes. And in that moment, a profound, crushing guilt washed over him. He had done this to her. He had pulled this brilliant, righteous woman from her world of light and law and dragged her down into his violent, shadowy existence. She had lost her career, her reputation, her home, her entire life because she had crossed his path. She was a casualty of his war. He thought of his sister, another innocent life destroyed by the chaos of his world. He could not, would not, let that happen again. He had a choice to make. He could keep her here, by his side, and let her fight a war that was not hers, a war that would almost certainly consume her. Or he could do the one thing his heart rebelled against. He could let her go. "There's a man I know," Dante said, his voice quiet, breaking the silence. "In a small town called Port Fourchon. He's a smuggler, a good one. He owes me a debt, a life debt." Evelyn looked at him, her expression guarded, questioning. "I can get you to him," he continued, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He can arrange a new identity, a passport, papers, everything. He can get you on a cargo ship to Portugal, Spain, anywhere you want to go. You can disappear, Evelyn, you can start over, have a real life, away from all of this." It was the most difficult offer he had ever made. He was offering her an escape, an exit from his life. He was choosing her safety over his own desire to keep her with him. She stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to a slow, burning anger. "A life?" she repeated, her voice low and incredulous. "What kind of life? Hiding in the shadows with a fake name, looking over my shoulder every second for the rest of my days? Is that the life you're offering me?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "Did you think I would just run? That I would just leave you here to fight Abernathy and Thorn alone? After everything we've done, everything I've lost? My life isn't something you can just protect or discard as you see fit, Dante. It's mine, and my choice is to stay. My choice is to finish this, with you." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. No one, in his entire life, had ever chosen him the man, not the power over their own survival. She wasn't a liability to be protected. She was a partner, a soldier who refused to abandon her post. His choice had been to save her. Her choice was to save him right back. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her jawline. The guilt was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a profound, humbling sense of awe. He had been ready to fight the rest of this war alone, but he didn't have to. They had lost everything. Their allies, their resources, their last piece of evidence. The entire world was hunting them. But as they stood in the dim, flickering light of the forgotten shack, surrounded by the ghosts of the bayou, they were not defeated. They were a united front. Two people against the world, with nothing left to lose and only a shared, unbreakable resolve to light their way. For 2 days, the fishing shack was their entire world. The city's chaos was a distant rumor, a static-filled report on a small, battery-powered radio. In the forced quiet, stripped of all their power and resources, they found a strange clarity. They couldn't outrun their enemies, and they couldn't outfight them. "So we make them fight each other," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the humid air of the bayou. She looked at Dante, her eyes sharp with the light of a desperate, brilliant idea. "We don't have the evidence anymore, so we have to become the evidence. We set the stage and let the monsters devour each other." The plan was audacious, a gamble that risked everything on a single, perfectly executed psychological play. They would lure both Abernathy and Thorn to one location, at one time. The bait would be the one thing they both desired and feared, the truth. Dante made the call, cashing in the oldest and most sacred debt he was owed, a favor passed down from his father. It granted him 10 minutes of access to the underworld's most secure communication network. 2 messages were sent, both anonymous, both untraceable. The first, to a private number on Abernathy's secure satellite phone, was simple and designed to prey on his paranoia. * Street Jude's Church. Midnight. The drive is yours. Come alone, or it all goes public. *. The second, sent to a dark web forum Thorn was known to frequent, was crafted to appeal to his colossal ego. * The patron is tying up loose ends. Street Jude's. Midnight. Don't let a king be taken by a pawn. *. The trap was set. The location, the derelict, deconsecrated Street Jude's church in the Bywater, a place of crumbling saints and shattered stained glass, a Gothic stage for their final act. Midnight found them hidden in the deep shadows of the choir loft, overlooking the cavernous nave below. Moonlight streamed through a hole in the roof, illuminating the dust and decay. They had 2 handguns and a shared, thrumming anticipation. They were no longer players in the game. They were its architects. At 12:05, Frank Abernathy arrived. He was not alone. He brought 4 men with him, cops from his personal tactical squad, all moving with the tense caution of men walking into a trap. "Sweep the perimeter," Abernathy commanded, his voice a low growl that echoed in the vast, empty space. Minutes later, a second set of headlights cut through the darkness outside. Elias Thorne entered through the opposite transept, flanked by 2 of his mercenaries. He moved with a calm, predatory confidence, his eyes scanning the church. The 2 men and their teams met in the center of the church, under the pale, judging gaze of a headless stone angel. "You're late, Frank," Thorne said, his voice laced with amusement. "What is this?" Abernathy snarled, his eyes darting to Thorne's men. "This wasn't the deal. My deal was with Moretti and the lawyer," Thorne replied coolly, playing his own game. "You, I believe, were told to come alone. It seems you don't trust your own allies." The air was electric with paranoia. Each man saw the other as the architect of his potential demise. This was the moment Evelyn had planned for. From the loft, Dante sent a heavy iron hymnal stand crashing to the stone floor in the far corner of the church. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. In the split second of confusion, as every head turned toward the noise, the carefully constructed paranoia ignited. One of Abernathy's nervous cops raised his weapon. One of Thorne's mercenaries mirrored the action. A single shot was fired, and then the church erupted into a maelstrom of chaotic, close-quarters combat. It was a short, brutal firefight, fought between 2 professional teams in the confusing darkness, each believing they were fighting for their lives against a betrayer. Amidst the chaos, Dante and Evelyn moved. They slipped down from the loft, using the gunfire and shadows as cover. Their targets were not the soldiers, but the kings. Dante intercepted Abernathy as the DA tried to retreat. It was a raw, physical confrontation, not between a cop and a criminal, but between 2 men whose lives were defined by buried family history. As they fought, Evelyn found herself face to face with Thorne. "Is this your grand design, Elias?" she taunted, her voice cutting through the noise. "A grubby little shootout in a ruin? You're not a visionary. You're just another thug with a god complex." Her words hit their mark. His calm facade cracked with rage, and he lunged for her, but it was a feint. The distraction was all Dante's backup needed. Marco, a ghost from the shadows, slammed into Thorne from the side, taking the ex-spy down in a heap. At the same time, Dante landed a final, decisive blow, sending Abernathy sprawling to the floor. He stood over his defeated foe, his gun aimed, his breath ragged. This was the moment. For his uncle, for Sophia, for everything. But as he looked down at the pathetic, beaten man, he lowered his weapon. Vengeance was a ghost's game. He wanted justice. The gunfire died down. The church fell silent, littered with the bodies and groans of the wounded. Abernathy was captured. Thorne was unconscious, being bound by Marco. They had won. The life and death gamble had paid off. Then, another sound. The distant, unmistakable wail of police sirens, growing steadily closer. They stood in the ruins of the church, victors of a war no one knew had been fought. But they were still Dante Moretti and Evelyn Tran, the 2 most wanted fugitives in the city. They had won, but freedom was still a world away. The wail of approaching sirens was a countdown to their own destruction. In the ruined church, surrounded by the wreckage of their war, there was no time for victory. "The crypts," Dante commanded, his voice sharp and clear, pulling Evelyn from her daze. "Marco, you know the way." Marco, ever prepared, pried open a stone slab in the floor near the altar, revealing a dark, narrow passage. It was an old priest's passage, a forgotten escape route from a more volatile time in the city's history. They bundled the bound and unconscious forms of Abernathy and Thorne into the darkness, disappearing into the belly of the earth just as the first police cruisers swarmed the church grounds above. They emerged into a storm drain 2 blocks away, leaving the chaos behind for the city to discover. Their destination was another of Dante's anonymous holdings, a vast, functional warehouse in the industrial district, smelling of sawdust and machine oil. Here, with the prisoners secured, the final act of their war would play out. They had no flash drive, no legal evidence to present to a world that already believed them to be terrorists. Evelyn knew they needed something more powerful than data. They needed a confession. She set up a camera on a tripod, its single, unblinking lens aimed at the chair where Frank Abernathy was tied. When he awoke, it was to the sight of her face calm and composed, a prosecutor ready to make her closing argument. "Forget the blackout, Frank," she began, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. "Let's talk about Argus International. Let's talk about a chemical plant, a brave witness, and a car accident on a rainy night 15 years ago. Let's talk about Michael Moretti. She laid it all out. His failed case, his festering grudge, his long-burning vendetta against the city's corrupt elite. She didn't accuse. She simply stated the buried truth she had uncovered. Abernathy, stripped of his power, his face bruised and his world in ruins, finally broke. The mask of the righteous public servant crumbled, revealing the bitter, vengeful man beneath. They deserved it, he spat, his eyes wild. All of them. Cromwell and his rich friends who owned the judges and the cops. They killed that family and got away with it. The law was powerless, so I became the law. I became the justice this city needed. He raved, a torrent of self-justification and righteous fury, condemning himself with every word. He confessed not to the blackout, but to the motive, to the rot in his own soul that had driven him to burn down the city to kill his personal demons. And the camera recorded it all. With the confession secured, they had their weapon. Now, they needed someone to wield it. Evelyn made one last call. Not to a reporter, but to the one man in the entire NOPD she still believed in. "Rourke," she said when the detective answered. "I need you to trust me one more time." The meeting took place under a lone flickering streetlight in a deserted freight yard. Detective Rourke arrived alone, as instructed, his face a mixture of caution and a desperate hope to believe in her. When Dante and Evelyn emerged from the shadows, followed by Marco with the two bound prisoners, Rourke's hand went to his weapon. "It's over," Evelyn said, holding up the small digital camera. "The flash drive is gone, but this is Abernathy's own confession, his motive, his madness, all of it. It's enough to reopen the Moretti case from 15 years ago. It's the first thread. Pull on it, and his entire world will unravel." They were handing him the biggest case and the biggest political scandal in the city's history. It was a leap of faith, placing their lives and freedom in his hands. As Rourke's backup, summoned by a quiet text, began to arrive in the distance, Dante stepped closer to the detective. His voice was low and deadly serious. "She's trusting you with her life. If she is not publicly and completely exonerated for this, every man I have left will tear this city apart to find out why. Protect her." It wasn't a threat. It was a sacred vow. With that, Dante and Evelyn melted back into the shadows, leaving a stunned Rourke with two notorious prisoners and the camera that held the key to everything. They had delivered justice, their way. Now, they had to disappear and wait for the system to for once do its job. They watched the sunrise from the rickety porch of the Bayou Shack. The storm was over. On the radio, the first fractured reports were coming in. Power was being restored. The mayor had announced a press conference, and news was breaking of the dramatic, middle-of-the-night arrest of District Attorney Frank Abernathy. The official narrative was still a mess of confusion and speculation, but the first seeds of truth had been planted in the fertile ground of the city's chaos. Evelyn leaned her head on Dante's shoulder, a profound exhaustion settling over her. The war was won. The battle for their future was just beginning. But as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The weeks that followed their victory were a strange, surreal purgatory. From the isolation of the Bayou Shack, Evelyn and Dante watched the city they had saved slowly heal itself, the story unfolding on the small radio and a satellite-linked tablet. It was like watching a play from a very great distance. The dominoes fell just as Evelyn had predicted. Detective Rourke, armed with Abernathy's unhinged confession, became the unwavering hero of the hour. He didn't just focus on the blackout. He pulled the thread of the 15-year-old Michael Moretti case, and Frank Abernathy's entire world unraveled. News reports painted a stunning picture of systemic corruption. Alistair Cromwell, the philanthropist CEO of the former Argus International, was arrested. The Lelong Foundation was exposed as a money laundering front for the city's corrupt elite. The story exploded onto the national stage, led by a relentless series of articles from Lisa Chang, who credited a courageous whistleblower deep within the justice system for the initial break in the case. Elias Thorne, ever the pragmatist, cut a deal. In a sealed testimony, he laid out every detail of Abernathy's plot, including the meticulous plan to frame Evelyn and Dante. Faced with irrefutable evidence and Thorne's testimony, Frank Abernathy's fall from grace was absolute. He was a monster of his own making, exposed and reviled. 1 month after the city went dark, a special prosecutor held a press conference. Evelyn's face appeared on the screen again, but this time it was accompanied by words like hero, unwavering courage, and deep cover operative. She was publicly, completely, and honorably exonerated. The warrant for her arrest had been a desperate act by a corrupt official. Evelyn Tran, the city was told, had saved them all. Dante Moretti's name was treated with more delicate ambiguity. In exchange for his unprecedented cooperation, and with Thorne's testimony confirming he was a primary target of the conspiracy, the state entered into a quiet agreement. The federal investigation that followed tore apart the remnants of the Argent Syndicate, but Dante Moretti himself was allowed to fade away. Il Fantasma Times was given what he had always cultivated, anonymity. The ghost was finally allowed to become a ghost. On the porch of the shack, listening to the final news report that declared the case officially closed, a profound quiet settled between them. The war was over. The world was no longer hunting them. For the first time, the future was not a question of survival, but a blank page. "You could go back, you know," Dante said, his voice low as he watched the sunset paint the bayou in shades of orange and purple. "They'd probably give you Abernathy's job if you wanted it." Evelyn smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I can't," she said, shaking her head. "I spent my whole life believing in the system, in the clean lines of the law. But the lines aren't clean, and the system is broken. I can't be a part of it anymore. Not like that." "What will you do?" he asked. "I'm still a lawyer," she said, a new strength in her voice. "I'm going to start a practice, a small one. I'm going to defend the people the system chews up and spits out, the ones who feel helpless, like my parents did. I'm going to fight for justice, but on my own terms this time." She looked at him, her gaze direct and full of a quiet, powerful love. "And what about you? Are you going to rebuild your empire?" Dante looked out at the water, at the peaceful, wild beauty of the landscape. He had spent his life building an empire of order to keep the chaos out, only to learn that true order was here, in the quiet authenticity of this forgotten place, with her. Il Fantasma Times is dead, he said, and the words felt like a final liberating truth. He died in that church. All he ever brought me was power, and all power ever brought me was a gilded cage. I have some legitimate assets left, enough to fund a pro bono law firm for a very long time. He turned to her, his steel-gray eyes, once so cold, now filled with a warmth that was reserved only for her. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "It won't be easy," she whispered, the enormity of their journey settling over them. "The ghosts, they don't just disappear." "I know," Dante said, his voice a soft promise. "But we're not running from them anymore. We'll face them together." The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the twilight sky. They were no longer a lawyer and a criminal, no longer justice and sin. They were just Evelyn and Dante, scarred, changed, but finally free. Standing on the edge of a world they had almost lost, they were ready for their new beginning.